Okay, so we've all heard of the Beatitudes from the Gospel of Matthew, right? But what if the way most of us have been reading them is, well, kind of backwards? We're about to look at this really fascinating interpretation that reframes the entire passage, not as a list of different blessed people, but as one single challenging journey. Let's dive in.
Let's just be honest for a second. When you first read the Beatitudes, they can sound a little depressing. The sermon we're exploring today even kicks off by comparing them to an old country music skit about gloom, despair, and agony. And you know what? When you look at who Jesus calls blessed, you kind of start to see why. I mean, check out this list: the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, the persecuted. This doesn't exactly sound like a recipe for a happy life, does it? It sounds more like a list of really tough situations. So what is going on here? And that right there is the million-dollar question. If these are all such difficult things to go through, why in the world does Jesus call them blessed? What's the secret that maybe we're all missing? Well, this is where the whole perspective flips on its head. The sermon we're pulling from argues that the way we usually read it, that Jesus is just listing off separate groups of people, is a huge misunderstanding. Instead, the idea is actually something pretty radical. All of these blessings are for one group of people. They're not separate categories at all. What they are is a description of the stages of a single connected journey, a path for every believer. And this path unfolds in three really distinct stages. It all starts with a specific attitude, which then inspires a certain kind of activity, which, and this is key, inevitably leads to attacks. Getting this three-part flow is the secret to unlocking the whole thing. So let's start at the very beginning with part one, the attitude. This first part is all about the foundational mindset, how a believer even approaches God in the first place. First up, being poor in spirit. Now, this has nothing to do with your bank account. The sermon defines this as the total opposite of pride. It's that moment you recognize you are completely spiritually bankrupt and totally dependent on God, approaching Him like a beggar, just asking for grace. Next up is mourning. And again, this isn't just about general sadness. It's the deep sorrow that comes when you see your own shortcomings and the brokenness all around you in the world. But here's the crucial part. It's that very feeling that pushes you to go find God. And finally, meekness. That word gets a bad rap, doesn't it? It doesn't mean weakness. It's about having an honest, clear-eyed view of your own limits, recognizing that, hey, you actually don't have the power to handle all of life's challenges by yourself. This humble attitude is the starting block for the entire journey. Okay, so once that humble attitude is in place, it doesn't just sit there. It logically flows right into part two, the activity. This mindset isn't passive. It actually forces you to act in a new way. And that activity starts with a hunger and thirst for righteousness. And our source here is super clear. This isn't some casual wish like, oh, I'd like to be a better person. No, this is an intense, urgent, all-consuming desire to live a life that's right with God and right with other people. This hunger then shows up in three really practical ways: being merciful, because you get how much mercy you've been shown; being pure in heart, which the sermon points out isn't about being flawless, but about having a single-minded, undivided devotion to God; and being a peacemaker, actively trying to fix broken relationships, starting with the people right around you. So, you've got the right attitude. You're engaged in the right activity. What happens next? Get ready for part three, the attacks. And the sermon presents this not as a maybe, but as an absolute inevitable result of living this way. So, why the attacks? I mean, why would doing good things cause problems? Well, you know that old saying, the truth hurts? It turns out that's really true. When you live a life of integrity in a world that often prefers comfortable lies, you're going to create some friction. So, the challenge isn't to water down the truth to make people comfortable. The real call is to hold two things together. Be kind, but be truthful. Be loving, but be truthful. The truth, in this view, has to come first, even when it's really, really hard to say or to hear. But for anyone who faces this kind of pushback, Jesus gives this incredible piece of encouragement. He basically says, hey, you're in good company. This is exactly how the prophets were treated for speaking the truth for centuries. It's actually a sign that you're on the right track. All right, so let's zoom out for a second and see how all of these pieces snap together. When you look at it this way, the entire path becomes crystal clear. Here it is, the whole journey laid out. It all starts with that internal attitude of humility, being poor in spirit, mourning, being meek. That inner humility then naturally produces the external activity, hungering for what's right, being merciful, and making peace. And when that life of truth bumps up against the world, the inevitable attack or response follows. You can just see how one stage flows right into the next. It makes so much sense. So the huge idea here is that the Beatitudes aren't some kind of spiritual buffet where you can just pick and choose the blessing you like the most. Nope. They are one single interconnected path that begins with your inner attitude, leads to your outward actions, and results in the world's reaction. And that leaves all of us with a really challenging question to think about. If this sermon has it right, and this really is the path, what does it actually mean to walk it, for real, today? That's definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.